Greetings and welcome. My name is James King, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Catholic Conference, and I'd like to present to you our next series of Town Square videos. October is traditionally Respect Life Month for the Catholic Church, and this month we are focusing on Catholic perspectives of end-of-life care. This will be a two-part video series. The first part will be the pastoral response to end-of-life issues, and the second part will focus more on the impact of physician-assisted suicide as it advances in society. Today, we are honored to have with us a returning guest to our Town Square videos. You probably recognize her if you've seen our previous videos on abortion and pro-life activities throughout New Jersey. I'd like to welcome a good friend, a colleague, Jennifer Ruggiero. And Jennifer, just for people who have not seen your past videos, I'm just going to go over this bio you sent, which is quite intimidating for me to read because it's so impressive. I hope I could someday have a bio almost as equal to this. But Jennifer, you serve as the Secretary for Family and Pastoral Life for the Diocese of Metuchen. You've worked with the Diocese of Metuchen since 1997. Again, I'm just going over some of these highlights here. You've coordinated a wide-ranging, diverse activities such as educational programs on church teaching, life issues. Let's see. You were honored by Life Choices Resource Center with the Faithful Servant Award in 2011. And then in 2016, you received the, can you pronounce that for me? What was that?
Benemerenti
Medal, a papal honor from Pope Francis for outstanding service to the Catholic Church. Well, I think that just sums it up. I don't think I'm going to go any further in your bio because that's just amazing. So we have an individual honored by the Holy Father to help us through this conversation. Jennifer, you and I have talked about end-of-life care many times, both as on a personal level, because we've both intimately experienced these situations over the last couple of years. You with parents and in-laws and other relatives, me with my parents, both my mother and father earlier this year. And I really think that was the genesis for us to decide on these this topic for the video series for Respect Life Month, because it is such a difficult topic. It's an uncomfortable topic. Nobody likes to think about worst case scenarios or losing a loved one, but obviously it's something that needs to be talked about. It's something that needs to be discussed because there is a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of confusion out there about how the Catholic Church approaches end-of-life issues. And I hope these videos can become a resource for us and a resource for all to help them facilitate these conversations and maybe even start the process of looking at where do they get the answers, how do they plan for it. I had a theology professor in college who would often say to us, gentlemen, when did Noah build the ark? And he would say, before the rain. So, in that kind of mindset, that's where we're going with this. We don't want to deal with these topics, prematurely, and we're certainly not asking people to fixate on them, but they definitely need to have some type of plan in place. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Jennifer to jump in. And if you could, would you lead us with an opening prayer, Jennifer?
Sure. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, we ask for your blessing as we meet this day to learn about building a culture of life. Give us loving hearts that we may show true compassion to those who are ill, suffering, or are near death. Give us just hearts to respect the inherent dignity of all, and grant us the wisdom, strength, and courage to protect and defend the gift of human life in all of its stages and conditions. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So Jennifer, I know this is something in your pastoral work you've dealt with. At the conference, we deal more with the policy side and the legislative side, but we're not looking to talk about policy and legislation today. We're looking to talk about the pastoral side, which I think can ultimately be summed up as that human interaction. How does the policy really affect people? How does the teaching affect people? And how do we address that? So I don't know if you would like to take a moment and maybe talk from both, it could be both your personal and professional experience, but what are some of the challenges or some of the questions you may have received in your work in the diocese surrounding the end of life care issue for the faithful?
Well, interesting enough, you mentioned the policy side of things, and as you well know, we had been working for years and years, 12 plus years, to oppose legislation on physician-assisted suicide here in New Jersey. And in my work, working to oppose that public policy, I had to get almost expert in end-of-life issues from the Catholic perspective, so that we could educate parishioners about the Church's teaching, as well as why we oppose that public policy. And it was a long journey battling it. We finally lost the battle in 2019, and so physician-assisted suicide is legal here. But the education needs to go on, because we don't want people turning and going down that path, especially for our fellow Catholics. So what I found over the years, learning about end-of-life issues, studying it, presenting it, it really informed my personal life. Little did I know that was going to happen. Over the last 8 or so years, I've experienced a lot of loss, but the knowledge of the Catholic faith and the Catholic teachings on end-of-life care really informed my journey with my parents, with my aunt, with my father-in-law. Really helped me to feel more comfortable in some of the decision-making that I was tasked with doing. I was very much involved in all of their healthcare decisions as kind of like their healthcare manager, so to speak. So it really helped me to feel confident and know where to go if I had questions with regards to different topics. And it's really good that people study this a little bit before they're faced with, as you said, where they're faced with a crisis, where they're having to make these decisions within a few days, and feel very uncomfortable about which direction to go in. So I think the information is important, because we do have physician-assisted suicide as an option, and we really don't want people going down that path without information. And so this educational program, I think, is going to be very helpful for people looking for some just guidance.
Sure. No, I agree. And, it's interesting what you were saying about working on the policy, the work we did to oppose physician-assisted suicide here in New Jersey, and how that, in a way, helped prepare you for the experiences you went through with your parents and your in-laws and your other relatives. And you were thankful for that. And I have to say, I was with you for that legislative battle, and we worked extensively on that. And I thought I was prepared, and I almost was the exact opposite, because when I found myself in that situation, I was starting to second guess what I understood, or what I understood the Church teaching to be, and how it should be applied. And I think that's one thing that is not often thought about, is the emotional part, that the emotional component of the situation when you're in that situation. So, and I guess that just further reinforces the need to talk about it when the emotion is not there. I mean, obviously it's emotional to start that conversation, but if you're not dealing with it in real time, you can remove that emotional piece and think about it very analytically, very with a clear mind, and have those conversations and put that plan in place, because it does become much more difficult with the emotional piece. And if you haven't discussed the pieces that go into this, it makes it that much more difficult. So I agree, and I thank you for your time and helping us with this, because I do hope this becomes a resource for people moving forward. So just to give our viewers kind of an outline, we're hoping to accomplish the following in this video. One is to just go over the foundational teachings on life. I think often we jump right into these topics of Catholic morality without giving the foundational teaching, and sometimes that's going right from crawling to running into a full sprint, and that can be difficult. So even if people have a decent understanding of those principles, it's a good refresher for all of us. Then we'll discuss a very important aspect of this, the living wills and advanced directives for healthcare. I know we receive a number of questions on them here at the conference throughout the year, people asking for our assistance, and there's some confusion and misconceptions about how they get filled out, when they're valid, when they're not valid. So that I think that'll be helpful. Then, we'll certainly talk about various aspects of care. And this was something, again, that I had to work on for both of my parents, and I had to go back, and Jennifer, you helped me through this, the proportionate and disproportionate care, or ordinary and extraordinary care. And then we'll have a discussion of principle of benefit and burden, and then decision making, and then finally, what we mean by death. What's the true meaning of death with dignity, and what's the Catholic perspective on that? So, moving forward, I guess we'll start. Jennifer, do you want to go ahead, and we can go, start with the overview of the principle of Catholic teaching on life with us?
Sure. Sure. So there's several basic principles that we want to discuss today. The first principle is God's dominion and human stewardship. So basically, these are simple concepts, but really worth emphasizing today as we discuss these issues. God is the creator, and human persons owe their creation to God. Human life is a gift, a sacred trust. We're a given, not a gift. Human persons have the right to use the gift of life, but not a right of dominion over life. And human responsibility for life is one of stewardship, not ownership. So often today, we think that we have autonomy over our lives, but God gave our lives to us as a gift, and we don't own it. We have to care for it.
Yeah, that's such a radical contradictory way of thinking of our life. Even myself, I often wonder, how much do I think of my life as a gift and not something that I own, or that I was owed.
Right.
It really is contradictory to popular thought. So if you don't start from that idea of gift, it makes everything else that much more difficult to accept. So I think that's a great point to highlight.
Yeah, so the second principle is that the sanctity of life, the Catholic Church respects life from the moment of conception until the moment of natural death. And each person has worth and dignity because she or he is made in the image and likeness of God. And the value and dignity of human life results solely from God's creating and sustaining love. This is a tough thing for people to get their head around in today's culture as well. When I go in and do presentations to the students at the schools, they don't even know what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. They don't quite get that. And so I always tell them in simple terms, you have built-in worth. You have built-in. Inherent is a hard word for them to get their heads around, but built-in worth. So it doesn't matter what you do. It just matters that you are. God created you because he loves you and wants to sustain you in your life with his love. So it's a really hard concept for even some adults to understand. When we say made in the image and likeness of God, we mean that we have qualities that the animals and the other creation don't have. We have intellect, so we can think and process ideas, and we also have free will, which means that when we take that information, we process it, we can choose to do good or we can choose to do evil. And so that we're at a way higher level than all of the other creation. And so we really have this inherent worth. God lives within us. His love sustains us. And again, just a basic concept, whether we're talking about beginning of life issues or end of life issues or anywhere in between, we have to remember that basic concept that we are inherently valuable and worth being here because God created us and thought about us and did it on purpose, and we have a purpose for him.
Again, I have 3 children of my own, all in various different grades, middle school or junior high, grade school, and high school. And, I've heard throughout their educational experiences, even when they try to explain what you're saying, that built-in value, at times it's not realized until it's a self-actualized built-in value. So everybody has dignity, but it's only what you define it as. So, even there, you're seeing what the popular mindset is today, that the built-in value is only worth what it's self-actualized. So whatever the individual says my self-worth is, that built-in worth is, that's all it is. But what we're saying here is, regardless of what the individual thinks about the built-in value, regardless of what society thinks or others may think, that built-in, this is what the objectively saying the built-in value is, that you are worth being loved, you're worth this love, and you have free will and intellect, and no matter what you think or others think, that can't be taken away.
And I think sometimes as people get older and they become infirm, they may not hear as well. So they have trouble doing things that they used to do, physically, mentally, emotionally, and we age and we become less maybe useful, society would say. So I think there's almost a devaluation of people as they get older, and sometimes that makes the elderly feel very unworthy. They don't feel as useful in the family. And so again, when I talk to the young people, I always say to them, you have grandparents or great grandparents. What value or what values do they have that help you in your life, and make them focus on the things that are important, like storytelling, or maybe bringing them to church, or passing down the faith, or cooking them cookies, or whatever it is. Some grandparents take care of their grandkids, so help them to focus on the things that are valuable to them, because even if they can't do anything as older people, they might be sick, they might be dying, terminally ill, they still have that inherent built-in value, even if they can't do things that they used to do. So it's always an important principle to bring up when we're talking about end-of-life issues in the elderly.
And now, what's the next is the two obligations. What are the obligations that come out of our understanding of life, Jennifer?
Okay, so the obligation to nurture and support life whenever we can, and the obligation not to harm or destroy life. So those are two basic principles, but so often in our society, we miss it.
Yeah, they almost seem like they're one and the same, because if you're dedicated to nurturing and supporting life, then it would be counterintuitive to do anything to harm or destroy it, or counterproductive, I guess, in that sense.
Right.
So, is there any other principles that?
Well, there's a third principle. Actually, there's two more. The third principle is the prohibition against killing. So we all know about the commandment, you shall not kill. Again, we have an obligation to protect life and an obligation not to destroy it. And again, the only place where we can allow killing is in a self-defense type of a situation. We don't want to have the arbitrary taking of a life. We want to protect life and not destroy it. So again, thou shalt not kill. Which speaks directly to physician-assisted suicide, which is an intentional action.
Now, and then the fourth principle?
The fourth principle is the principle of interdependence. Again, in so much in our society, we talk about being autonomous, but we are persons that are created to be social and in community. We're a community of loving persons. We're not on this earth to just live in a hermitage and just take care of ourselves. We live in community, so all that has to be considered. We're interdependent persons, and no one's freedom is absolute. So even if I want to end my life, we have to always consider how that is going to impact all those around us, our family members. Other persons' welfare must be taken into consideration. And individual freedom, which is important, but it always has to be balanced with the common good. And we always have to avoid scandal. So just, an example, if someone wants to end their life using physician-assisted suicide, one of the things that we argued when we were opposing this public policy was that when you start allowing that, because in the end, it saves money for the insurance companies, you're actually taking away maybe the right of someone that wants end-of-life care and wants to live on. And so their care may be denied because it's much more expedient, much more cost-effective to give someone the means to end their life. Right. So again, that's an example of how individual freedom has to be balanced with the common good. And so it's just really important that we live in community and we are dependent on each other.
Right. And I think that's one area too that people really need to take some time to reflect upon and think about, because often, and we find this with a number of legislative battles, I think often you hear this kind of this term misused from people who do support physician-assisted suicide. They turn it into saying, well, they're doing this as an act of love for their relatives, so their relatives don't have to see them suffer. And again, it's kind of radical for the Catholics to say, well, it's denying your relatives an opportunity to serve you, to love you, to journey with you during that time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yes. It is. It's an important time. It can be a time of great pain, but it can also be a beautiful, grace-filled time when you're journeying with someone at the end of their lives. And we have to kind of think about the word compassion. Saint Pope John Paul II always spoke about how compassion is suffering with another. It's not ending the life of the person that you can't stand seeing suffer. When we talk about quality of life and suffering, we have to think about true compassion means to suffer with, and it's not easy, but that period of time can be so filled with graces and so beautiful and peaceful.
Jennifer, I think that was a good overview of the principles of Catholic teaching on the dignity and sanctity of life. I think one area before we move forward that we should talk about is death and dying, and that distinction between allowing someone to die. I mean, often you hear the phrase "let nature take its course," and actively killing. I think there's a fine line there, and that can often get confused, especially in those emotional situations. And again, I'll share, as I was going through these experiences with my own parents, my mother who was in the end stages of her battle with cancer, and my father just dealing with his own medical issues. It was tough with the medical personnel. I'm sure they were doing the best they could, but to get the answers that would help me make that distinction. And again, I don't know, somebody told me after the fact, when you ask the questions so you can make that distinction and make the right choices, the goal of the medical team is to almost give you, like, they don't want to give up, in the sense of, like, that's their job, is to keep trying to find solutions. And it's a difficult job. I just felt like when I asked the question, they were very hands off. They were, to some of the answers. It was like, well, it could be this or it could be that. And, I'll be the first one to say that I knew very early on I was never going to go into the medical profession based on my science grades in high school. So, when you give me those range of options in the medical terminology, it just made it that much harder to make the distinction. And again, it goes back to the fact that I was so thankful I had a great support system around me that I could call, and smarter people than myself to talk to and bounce off what I was hearing, so I could make the proper choices. But I think we should spend some time on that, because that often is a very hard thing to distinguish, and sometimes can be confused in that process. So would you like to walk us through that?
Sure. So there's just a distinction that needs to be made. Killing is any intentional action or omission that brings about the death of another, but allowing to die is withholding or withdrawing futile or overburdensome treatment. So there's a distinction there. One is an intentional action, and there's an intent to end the life of someone, and the other is to let nature take its course. Sometimes we have situations, and I can give some examples myself, where our actions are futile. Like, I have found that sometimes doctors don't give you the answers that you're looking for, because they want to solve the problem, and they know that they can't.
Which is a very I mean, again, we're not criticizing that. That's a very honorable a mindset to have. That's what you want doctors who want to solve the problem and who want to be aggressive going after that. So
I'll give you a real life example. My aunt, 89 years old, very robust life. She was, just a vital person until, one day in January, she called me up and she said her doctor said, go right to the hospital. We did blood work. Turns out she had stage 4 cancer in numerous parts of her body. 89 years old, and when she came out of the hospital after her biopsy, she was actually yellow. She was so jaundiced. And the doctor said, she's not a candidate for surgery. She's not a candidate for radiation or chemo because of her age and the fact that the cancer was throughout her body. But there was a possibility that she might be a candidate for immunotherapy. So we were looking down that road. And she was starting to fail physically at that point. She was always robust. She was, very active. She was reading 3 books a week. Her mind was clear. But I could see she was failing. So I tried to talk to both her cancer doctor and her gastroenterologist, and tried to get them to do a little bit of weighing the pluses and minuses of doing a procedure that they were suggesting. Like, how long is this going to help her? What are the risks? What are the burdens? She's 89. She's got cancer all over. is this going to extend her life by 3 months or 3 years or 3 days? And the doctors really struggled with giving me any kind of an answer. Finally, I said to the gastroenterologist, I said, what would you do if it was your aunt? And he says, well, it's up to her. It's really got to be up to her. Because again, she was very clear-minded, and she wanted to live. She wanted to try that last procedure. And, I tried to explain the pluses and minuses, benefits and burdens, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But she really wanted to try it. And after the procedure that they did, she only lasted 15 days.
Wow.
So it's a lot of difficult, decisions to be made. But in this case, she was so clear-minded that even though I tried to get counsel from the doctors, she was very determined to have this procedure. And, she was ready to take the risk involved. But because she was competent enough to make the decision, we had to go with what she decided. She may have lasted longer without this procedure.
Oh, wow.
She chose to do it. Yeah.
Interesting.
So.
What I found interesting about your story is when I was thinking about with my father, the last week of his life, we had taken him to the hospital, or I had taken him to the hospital, and he was having some type of infection. They discovered that because of his diabetes, it had created a wound on his leg that had gotten infected, and the antibiotics they had tried to treat it with over time did not work or were not effective. So it came down to surgery, but that surgery was also going to be complicated by the fact of his heart failure and his kidney failure. It was just a whole range of problems, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but I remember standing in his room with the surgeon, because what they wanted to do in terms of trying to treat the infection on his leg, that would hopefully allow them to start treating the heart failure and the kidney failure and all that. It was this multi-step process, and everything it really put you back in awe of how complex the human body and our physiology and our is as a human person. I mean, just to look at medicine from a macro level. But when they started talking about the surgery, and I was like, well, is this really, they were describing how aggressive it was going to be, and how much time it would take. And the surgeon said, even after I do this initial surgery, it might take 10 other surgeries, and we might even have to take your father's leg, and I'm not sure he would survive anesthesia. And at that point, I'm still like, I don't know what to do. And I was explaining, he asked, if I was Catholic and everything. I said yes. And he never identified himself as Catholic, but he said, listen, this is everything going on with your father. We can make him comfortable. The surgery, though, we can't guarantee is going to, it's going to be a lot of, risk for something we can't even say will have any reward on him. This is, and he almost took that. I was very fortunate that he took that perspective with me, because that kind of reset my mind and brought me back down to that idea of what is extreme, what is proportionate, what is letting nature take its course. I think if they were more, I think if they were more confident that surgery would have, helped facilitate the treatment of other issues and not be a hindrance to it or exacerbate it, we probably would have gone in that direction. So
I think one of the big misconceptions of what the church teaches on end-of-life care is, I think people think that we have to have every single machine and every single tube and every single procedure done at the end of life. We need to preserve it beyond, any other consideration. I think that's a misconception that people have. It's okay to decline a treatment, or to say it's something that is, I feel, too burdensome. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. It's okay. It's okay to say, no, I don't want that.
Right.
I had a dear friend who had cancer, and he went through a lot of treatment, like 3 years of chemo, and they started with the radiation, and he did maybe 3 rounds of the radiation. And he said, you know what? I don't want this anymore. It's too hard. And so he ended up going on hospice, palliative care and hospice. And, he didn't want to go through that grueling radiation treatment. So he decided against it. And that was perfectly okay, because it was too hard for him, So,
I do think that's important for people to understand. And, just talking about, talking about that, I think it's important for us to say now as we move forward, because we are asking people to give consideration to have some of these discussions before they get into the situation, is that also to understand and be patient with yourselves as you have these conversations, because you're not going to know every scenario. I mean, what I went through with my parents, we had talked about DNRs and living wills with my parents, but those were, if they had a heart attack and I was in the emergency room, did they want to be resuscitated? Did they want to be put on some type of, that was like a critical incident type thing. This was never dealt with any type of long-term terminal illness. What's the long stage plan? So, with that being said, I think people also have to go into this understanding you're not going to be able to plan out for every possible scenario because there's just too many out there, and that's okay, but having the conversations will help you prepare for the unknowns that may come your way in the future.
Absolutely. We recently had my in-laws move in with us, and since then my father-in-law has passed. He moved in because of his declining health. But now it's actually sparked in me the need to talk to my own kids about, God forbid, something happened to my husband or I, who would be the caretaker? Who would I move in with, or my husband move in with? Because, so often we don't have those conversations, and then there's a crisis. And then you're like, now what do we do? But because of my life's journey, I feel like, okay, I can feel pretty comfortable saying to my sons or my daughter, is there room in your house for me or dad? It's
Right.
important. I mean, even those general conversations, just to even just broach the subject is sometimes important. It gets people thinking.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I mean, my wife and I, after going through this with my parents, my wife and I are already in the process of saying, okay, let's look at long-term care insurance, something like that. Not that something that a product that not many people know of. Everybody knows life
Right.
insurance, but what do you do if you need to go into a facility? You don't want to be, tied, to a certain place because of financial means. You can purchase that insurance, and the earlier you go in to purchase it, the cheaper it is. I mean, I was looking at it initially, and I think it's the cost of a couple cups of coffee a month, for right now. And that's a small price to pay for the peace of mind that you can give your loved ones. And and it also touches on what you talked about earlier about that sense of usefulness. It gives you a sense of power, because if you have a product like long-term care insurance, you do make some of these decisions now, when the moment comes, you have that power to make that decision and not say, oh, I can't afford to go here, so I have to go where Medicare or one of these other insurance plans provider, I have to go move in with a loved one. So I think that's absolutely right. That's, in a small way, that's kind of the way, the Lord makes crooked lines straight. He gives us these experiences so we can learn from them and use that intellect to, help in future situations. So Jennifer, I know we've been talking about, the making these plans, and I think one of the questions that come up, and it came up, I know, with my mother, about what was proportional care, what was disproportionate care. I even learned after a fact from a friend who went into a similar situation, and the doctor this friend was working with for her parents, or her parent, I believe it was her father, when they made the decision to forego any type of further treatment for the illness and just put her father into some type of, I believe it was palliative care at the time. The doctor, who was well-meaning, the friend told me the doctor identified as not being Catholic, but the doctor went on to say, well, the Catholic Church has changed its teaching on proportionate and disproportionate care, and that providing nutrition and hydration, even if it's artificial, is not required in every instance. So I know, like, there's a lot of confusion on that. Like, there are instances where food and hydration can be removed, but it's not something that we can choose what those instances are. There are clear guidelines on that. So I think it's important. Thankfully, in the situation I just highlighted, my friend who went through that situation knew enough to tell the doctor that no, that's not exactly what the church teaches on that. But I'm thinking about people who may not be as well versed as my friend, and again, with the emotion, may hear something like that and be like, Oh, okay. And go along with that. So you want to go ahead and give us a little brief overview on that or discuss that for a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I think that we need to talk about proportionate or sometimes called ordinary care and distinguish between that and disproportionate and extraordinary care. Those terms are kind of used interchangeably, but proportionate means are all those medicines and treatments and procedures and technology that offer a reasonable hope of benefit, and that can be obtained without excessive pain or without excessive expense or burden. So, in other words, if you have diabetes, you would take your diabetes medicine. If you broke a leg, you would, obviously fix a leg. If you had a cold, you could take aspirin. Those are very ordinary means. Disproportionate or extraordinary means are those medicines, treatments, procedures, technology that may not offer considerable benefit or hope, and that cannot be obtained without excessive pain, expense, or burden. So there is a difference. So we are expected, because we're supposed to nurture our lives, to take advantage of ordinary care. You know, ordinary things today may be different than they were 50 years ago because expenses are different. Technology has, improved. But extraordinary things are things that we can take advantage of, but we don't have a moral obligation to do so. So, for example, my mom had cancer. She was diagnosed at 72. She went through about 4 or 5 years of chemo. She turned out being a very good candidate for some experimental cancer treatments. And so she really wanted to live. She was young. She was vibrant. She wanted to see her grandkids get married. She wanted to see her great grandkids born. She had a lot of milestones that she wanted to get to. So she ended up doing this experimental treatment, and that lasted maybe 4.5 years. And then finally, it just seemed like nothing would work anymore. So in her case, she was doing experimental treatment. For her, she chose to do that. She did not have to choose to do that. Morally, she could have said, no, I don't want treatment, but she really wanted to live. So her choice was to go ahead and do it. And then at the end, she had no choice because there was nothing really else that they could do. So other people, like I often look at her and what she went through with those 4.5 years of chemo and the other treatments and think to myself, I don't know if I'd be so courageous. I don't know if I'd want to go through all that. She was at the doctor, 2 and 3 times a week for hours at a time and had a lot of side effects and all, but she really wanted to get through these milestones. I look at that and I'm not so sure I would make the same decision. And morally, that would be totally acceptable if I said no. So that's just one example of extraordinary means was the experimental treatment, and but she had that will to live. Just like I mentioned, my aunt really wanted that last procedure because she took the chance. She figured the risk was worth it. If it could help her live longer, she wanted to do that. Morally, she did not have to, she was not obliged to do that last procedure because it could be considered extraordinary. Another example would be my father-in-law had congestive heart failure, and what they found, and he had a lot of troubles. He had surgeries and everything. They found that the fluid was starting to build up in his lungs, and so we brought him to a lung doctor, and the lung doctor says, "Well, we think it's probably lung cancer, but he's got all these other things going on. He's elderly and really weak and frail." And we decided that it wasn't even worth doing a biopsy because even if he was determined that he had lung cancer, there was really nothing that they could do to treat him. So in that case, a biopsy might be considered ordinary, but in this case, it was extraordinary because it may actually have caused him to die sooner. And really, there was no benefit. There was really no benefit to doing the procedure. So we decided not to do that. So those are just 2 examples of how, how to kind of come to these conclusions. Like, is it going to benefit the person, or is it going to, make extra burden for the person, or not give any benefit at all? So it's a tightrope sometimes, but it's something that we really have to consider.
Yeah, and again, I think because this is very, I want to say it's on the surface, it's understand. I guess it's understand. You can understand it easy. It's digestible. I can see the distinction between the two, but this is complex. Especially trying to figure out when procedure, because it's almost like an ordinary procedure, depending on the context and circumstances, can become an extraordinary procedure
Absolutely.
at some
And that,
point.
and that's the really important thing, is that what's burdensome to you may not be burdensome to me. It's
right.
very individual. It's very case by case. And again, sometimes the doctors can be very helpful with this. Like when I talked about my father-in-law, the lung doctor was excellent. She said, he's got all these other things going on. If we go in there and do a biopsy, it might actually speed up his decline. And really, if we do this, what knowledge are we gaining?
Yeah.
There's really nothing that's going to be helpful. So it is complex and it is scary, especially if you're not a medical person, but you have to know the questions to ask.
And again, not to belabor the point, but I hope people do watch this video and come away with the importance of having these conversations beforehand, because I think what you just highlighted emphasizes that when you say what may be extraordinary for one may not be extraordinary for another. So that example you gave about your mother taking on the experimental treatment, it's important that you know what your loved one's medical wishes are, because they may be different than what you think their medical wishes are, or what you would want done. And again, you can't base on what you would want done for someone else.
Right.
I mean, obviously, certain circumstances may lead you to that, but if you have these conversations beforehand, it helps you prepare for that.
And these are ongoing conversations. These are ongoing
right.
conversations. And the more you talk about it, the more comfortable you get with it. You may not be ready to sign a DNR, or you may not be ready to stop treatment, but in 2 months, you might be ready. You know what I mean? It's a dynamic journey, because people have enough after a while, or they decide, you know what, I'm tired. I want nature to take its course, or whatever. So it's an ongoing conversation, and it's good to start kind of just talking about these things early. And some of it can just be based on the journey that you've gone through yourself. Like both of us have had loss, and so it's kind of easy to kind of talk to other loved ones about these situations, because we've gone through it, and so it's just important ongoing conversations. And again, proportionate, we're required to be good stewards of our lives, and so we should try to nurture it as best we can, but disproportionate, there's no sin in declining treatment if you find it burdensome, or that it doesn't have benefit that you choose to do.
And again, I think any of these topics could be a whole, not just video unto themselves, but a whole series of videos. I mean, that's how complex some of these issues are. I think one of the important things to highlight, and it's something I learned going through the process with my parents, is that I think when we talk about end-of-life care, we often get focused on the extremes. It's either we have to give everything, or we give nothing, in terms of care, and we're locked into that. I think what people have to understand, and you brought this up, Jennifer, about ongoing conversations. I think not only do you have to review and have these conversations as life occurs or different life events come up, you have to understand that they can be changed in the moment. And that was something I learned when we decided to move to palliative care, which is different than hospice. Again, we're not, we could do a whole series of videos on palliative care and hospice, but people should definitely look into, we'll touch on it briefly, but people should definitely do more research on it. But, palliative care would treat and, provide that ordinary care for your loved one, for yourself. But one thing that was always reemphasized to me is people come out of palliative care, people come out of hospice, circumstances change. So, while you may be in a moment where everything seems definitive, you also have to be prepared that you can change your mind on these things. Is that, I mean, am I correct on that, Jennifer?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's case by case, and it's you decide the benefits and the burdens based on your own physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health at the time of the decision. So again, you could just be so stressed out about a treatment that, you start it and then you're like, no, I just can't continue this. And it's okay to stop. It really is. And there's just so many different things to weigh when you're making these decisions. And that's why it's important to have your loved one involved in those, making those decisions with you. But in so many cases, and we'll talk about advanced directives for healthcare, the patient becomes incompetent to make those decisions. and someone else is making those decisions. That's why the conversations are important, because today you might be thinking straight and tomorrow something happens and you can't competently make those decisions yourself.
So Jennifer, I think we've gotten to a point where you've presented a good foundational background on life, and then talking about end of care from the Catholic perspective. But I think we need to get into we've talked about preparation. So I think we need to get into giving people, kind of concrete next steps of what they can do right now. If they're so motivated after watching this video, what can they do right now? How can they start this process? I obviously think, there's a number of steps, but one of the easiest things, I think there's often a misconception about it. One of the easiest things people can do is begin the process of filling out a living will or advance directive for healthcare, because then you don't have to think about the topics. They kind of are presented there, and you can start facilitating the conversations based on what those documents outline. And obviously, if anybody is looking for a form, the New Jersey Catholic Conference website has them up there for their free downloadable with instructions. But do you want to just kind of give more of detail on those in case someone's not as familiar with those forms?
Sure. So Advanced Directive for Healthcare, or living will, is an actual written document which gives you some opportunity to say what your end of care wishes would be. It's pretty simple, and what you don't want to do is try to list all the different scenarios. As Jim mentioned before, it's impossible to list all the different things that could happen. The example that I always give is, oftentimes people will put in their living will, I don't want to be put on a ventilator. And that's a blanket statement. But for instance, say you were to have a car accident and you have some kind of trauma and crisis, you need to be on a ventilator for a week to speed up the recovery of your body. And then the ventilator comes out and you're not hooked up to a machine for the rest of your life. It's an interim, treatment to get you through the healing process. And if you had that in your living will, your advanced directives, you're kind of like cutting off your nose to spite your face. So you don't want to list all those things. You want to have, the better alternative would be to designate a healthcare proxy, which is someone that can make decisions in the event that you are unable to make decisions. And that person is someone that you have ongoing conversations with, so they know what your wants and desires are should you have a crisis. So in that document, you have the opportunity to check boxes and indicate what you prefer should you be in these scenarios, but also designating someone that could speak for you. Now, if you just have a piece of paper that has, different things checked off or different scenarios listed, a doctor can either look at that or stick it in his drawer. But if you have someone that's advocating on your behalf, and as we know, the healthcare system today, you really need to have an advocate. You have someone that's running after the doctor saying, no, mom wanted this or dad wanted that. They're much more likely to follow those directives. So it's important to have someone in your life that, is a faithful Catholic, that you think has prudential judgment, and that has these conversations with you and that you trust. So those are the advantages to having the directives and a healthcare proxy.
So Jennifer, one of the questions we get about the living will or advanced directive we've gotten in the past is, do you need an attorney to help you fill this form out, or do you need to have it notarized for it to be held valid for a hospital or a doctor or a medical professional to legally recognize the document as your wishes? Again, here at the conference, we're not authorized to help people fill this form out or give any guidance on it. We provide it. And when people ask about needing an attorney, I often say to them, that's their call. If they want to include it amongst their will or power of attorney forms that they're filling out, things like that, then certainly discuss it with your attorney. But for most people, the thought of hiring an attorney to do this often comes with, I don't have the money, I can't afford to do that. So We don't
Yeah,
want people to be precluded from, filling this out because they feel they don't have the financial means to do so. So is that something they need to do, or?
they don't need to have it authorized by an attorney. They can certainly work with an attorney, but that's not required. What is required is a witness, and you want to have a couple of the copies available so that should something happen, it's easy to find. If you do assign a healthcare proxy, it would be good to give the form to the healthcare proxy, because God forbid something happens, that person is your healthcare person. That was the position that I've been in numerous times now, is the person that is the advocate for the patient, because sometimes there's so much going on. Someone's got to be in charge of holding it all together. They're seeing so many doctors or whatever, and one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. So if you're the healthcare person in your loved one's life, you should have a copy of that living will or advance directive. And again, avoid making broad statements like, I never want this or I never want that, because different scenarios can come up. But if you have these conversations with the proxy, you're in much better position to have your desires and your wants followed.
Jennifer, the other thing I noticed with my parents, every time I had them we went into a hospital, or when I had to move them into an assisted living facility, one of the first intake questions was about an advance directive or a living will. So you're starting to see, and I think it's been for a while now, that medical institutions are asking for them, or asking people or helping people facilitate them. One thing, and again, I don't know what your thought is on this. If it's not a dire emergency, at that point, I would just ask people to exercise some patience with that. I do find that when they do intake at hospitals and nursing homes, they want everything done yesterday. But if you find, I don't know, my advice is, if you find yourself in a situation where you're doing that intake, or you're moving a loved one in and to a nursing home or assisted living, or you're going into a hospital and you haven't had these conversations yet and they're asking you about it, it's okay to say, can you give us till tomorrow or the next day before you fill anything out? Because at least, I mean, it's not the optimal scenario, but you at least you want to give yourself some time to discuss it if it's not a life threatening an emergency. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, that's kind of my take on it, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
Absolutely. I think that, I think it's actually a law that the healthcare facilities have to ask whether you have a living will or an advance directive. And if you don't, they have to offer you one. And sometimes one form is better than another. And I would recommend that anyone listening goes on our New Jersey Catholic Conference website and download that, because it's leaning more towards the Catholic perspective. It actually has some bullet points to guide you in filling it out. But it's not something that you absolutely have to have when you enter a facility. They give you the option. They have to ask, but you don't have to have one. So if you need time, certainly take that time.
Yeah, I guess it's more like, don't feel you're being pressured by the facility to make rash decisions on your
Right. And that's
care.
the other thing. I think that people get frightened when they hear that. Like, it seems like, and you don't want to make these decisions in a place of fear. You want to, have it when you're, feeling like these conversations can be had, and that you're doing it kind of the right way.
Jennifer, as we conclude the section on the advance directive, is there anything we overlooked? Is there any final piece of advice that you may want to offer someone or listeners?
Just about making that final decision. Now, now say you are a patient that has advance directive for healthcare, you also have a healthcare proxy, and you go into a facility, you have to make a decision about a certain treatment. If you're in your right mind, if you're competent, the patient is the one that makes the decision, even if it's different than the advance directive, even if it's different than what was discussed with the healthcare proxy. If there's any question about the competency of the patient, the next thing is the healthcare proxy, because again, that's a dynamic discussion. It might not have been annotated in the living will or the advance directive, but the healthcare proxy is given the confidence by the patient to make those decisions. And then finally, if there's no healthcare proxy, it would go to the advance directive. So I just want to give you, kind of the listing of the sequence. It's the patient first. If the patient's unable, it goes to the healthcare proxy. If there is no healthcare proxy, it goes to the advanced directive for healthcare. So that's the way the decisions are made.
Jennifer, I think that was very important to go through the understanding of the advanced directive and living will process, but also to talk about when the healthcare proxy becomes responsible for the medical decisions, and the role the patient still plays, the individual still plays in their own medical decisions, even as they're going through the situation or the process at that time. And I think we all know of stories. Maybe they're stories friends shared with us. Sadly, they might be stories from our own families where that all gets challenged and arguments occur among family members. I think we all know of a family that probably has been torn apart by trying to make these decisions for a loved one. And again, with so many of these topics today, I think we could spend a whole video series delving into them, but just to kind of give people a little bit more information, not that it would answer all of their questions, but if you find yourself in that situation, I know for myself, and again, because this is so fresh in my memory, it just happened this year with my parents. I was, in a way benefited by being an only child. I don't have siblings, or I didn't have siblings that I had to worry about arguing with. It was myself sitting with the medical team and, with my parents up to a certain extent, but both of them experienced some type of cognitive impairment because of their illnesses. My mother with her cancer, once it spread to her brain, and then my father with his issues and the infection and how that affected his ability to make decisions. So it was quite clear. Again, for me, it was quite clear. At this point, the doctors are like, they're not able to make their decisions. It's on you now. But not everybody has that type of situation play out for them, and so I don't know. Is there something that you can offer just as a brief guidance to say, here's what you would do, here's how you start that process? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think that in some cases it's very clear, like if there's a mental decline happening, whether it be dementia or just something because of the treatment. In other cases, it's not so clear. So that's where you really have to lean on the medical profession to give you some help. One thing that's very important, I think, is sometimes someone can be in mental decline, and the average stranger walking up to them would not have no idea that the person isn't in their right mind, because they seem to make sense. It's important that whoever is closest to the patient, that is with the patient the most, has an important role to weigh in on that. Because again, a doctor coming in and meeting a patient for the first time, may say, hey, seems fine to me. He knows the president, he knows what day of the week it is, he knows all these things. Meanwhile, the patient is making all kinds of crazy or, ungood decisions, or poor judgments, I should say. So the healthcare proxy should really be the person that's closest and spends the most time. And that person has the responsibility, because when the patient was completely fine, that was when this person was designated to be in charge. So there may be other family members that disagree, but again, the healthcare proxy is the one that's having those conversations, that's spending time with the patient, that knows this is not normal. This is not normal decision-making process for dad or for mom or whatever. So it's difficult, but again, you have to, spend time with the patient, and also lean on the doctors and have them do an evaluation if you suspect if there's disagreement in the family. We had to do that with my dad. He seemed fine to some people, but I knew his judgments were way off. And so we had him evaluated, and it ended up that he was deemed incompetent. And he had 3 more years that he lived, and I had to be in charge of his healthcare decisions because he truly was unable to. And again, my aunt was perfectly in her right mind until the day she died. And she made all of her healthcare decisions. My father-in-law was a little bit in between stage, because he was starting to decline. So sometimes it's very clear and sometimes it's not. And again, prudential judgment in trying to navigate that it's tough, but again, lean on the medical professionals.
Yeah, and you talked about prudential judgment. I think again that's a good opportunity to remind people that, while we're saying preparation is key here, learn the issues, learn Catholic teaching, pray, take it to prayer, obviously, do as much as you can, but don't feel overwhelmed because there is no perfect outcome. It's not going to be, perfectly planned out. And I think most people understand that, but you're going to get the curveballs, you're going to get the circumstances or the situations that you did not expect. And at the end of the day, you can only make your best possible judgment, and you only can make best possible judgment if you properly and adequately prepare yourself. And
Yeah.
that after the fact, it takes a lot off your mind that you did everything you could. I think it's the coach John Wooden, the UCLA coach, that used to say, what was it? Was it failure to prepare is preparing to fail? So that preparation, again, it just echoes that preparation is key.
Yeah, so that leads right into formation of your conscience.
Yes.
So often I get questions from people. I don't know if I made the right decision for mom, or I don't know if I'm not sure about this decision. But it's after the fact, and they have self-doubt and worry that they did something that isn't aligned with church teaching. So it's really important to form your consciences. And what I mean by that is, if you have a loved one that's in decline or in some kind of treatment, gather the facts, talk to as many people as you can, talk to the doctors, talk to the nurses, talk to the social workers, gather the facts, and then reflect on the Catholic teaching that we've been discussing today, the fundamental principles, the sanctity of life, the obligation to nurture it and not to destroy it. Examine your motives and your emotions. Again, sometimes, that's where it gets a little murky. It's difficult to take care of a loved one, especially at the end of life. There's difficult decisions to make. There's a lot of time that's involved. There's a lot of self-sacrifice that goes into this. If you're in charge of someone's healthcare or even involved in it, maybe not necessarily in charge of it, a lot of self-sacrifice. So you have to reflect on what your motives are for making a decision, and go back to what your patient's wishes would be, and discuss it with others, discuss it with family members. It can be difficult because there can be disagreements, but it's important to have those conversations and be open and transparent and honest. And then pray. Again, take it to prayer. You've gathered the facts, you've talked to as many people as you can, you've reflected on church teaching. Pray about it. Ask God for some guidance. Ask the Blessed Mother to wrap her mantle around your loved one and you when you're making the decision. And then make a decision and be comfortable and at peace with it. Because if you've done all those things, most likely you're making the right choice, the right decision for your loved one. And don't second guess yourself. Don't have self-doubt. Again, if you've done all these steps, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, no, and I like that you brought up about the being cognizant of your own emotional and mental state of mind. Again, going back to my parents, especially with my mother, I was caring for almost 3 years, and when it got towards the end there, what crept into my mind was just the relief of not having to get more phone calls or drive to more doctor's appointments. And I had to take a step back and talk with my wife and talk with some friends just to say, am I making this because I want my life to be easy, or making this decision because I want my life to be easier? Or, is this the right decision for mom? And, thankfully I had people who were honest with me and, but also validated, saying, of course you want your life to be easier. Nobody wants to go through these stressful and sad situations, so it's okay to have those it's okay to have that feeling, but that's not the number one priority here,
Absolutely.
In an odd way, in a very odd way. And I guess Catholics, we do have some odd ways of thinking of it. It's like being a parent all over, for those of us who are parents, and, you understand that total dependence of another individual on you. And, parents don't, I guess sometimes parents feel guilty that they think about their own needs before their child's needs. Like, would you just stop talking, or would you just go to bed? I guess it's that circle of life type of mentality with that you were talking about. So I think that's great advice about properly forming the conscience, and just knowing that if you do those steps,
you're in
be
pretty
at
good
peace
shape.
with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to bring up one more thing.
Sure.
Like when you're making these decisions, like whether you're going to do XYZ treatment, there's a complex blend of factors that go into it. And these are the things that you need to consider. Like, what is the rate of success of the procedure? Like, is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Is it only a 20% chance that something good will come out of this? What is the age of the patient? You may make a decision for a 40-year-old father of 3, different decision than you would for an 89-year-old mother, whatever. So the age of the patient is key. What are the risk factors? What are the risk factors of the procedure? Could there be death? A sooner death? Could there be other complications? What's the nature of the illness? Is it something that is complicated? Like, there's different, my dad had congestive heart failure, he had Parkinson's, he had dementia, and he had diabetes. There was a complex blend of things. What's the type of recovery? A friend of mine had shoulder problems. She was in her 80s. They told her that the recovery for the procedure was going to be very lengthy, so she opted against having the surgery. The recovery is very important. And again, what are the resources of the family? Is there health insurance? Is this going to bankrupt the family? These are all factors to be considered in making the decision. And again, forming your conscience and keeping all of these factors in mind will help you to have the best outcome.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that all up, because again, I think going back to some of the misconceptions about Catholic teaching on end-of-life care, I do think there's some people out there that believe that we say all those are, you shouldn't think about any of those things and just focus on keeping somebody alive, even if it's unnecessarily. And what the beauty of Catholic teaching shows, and if you find this throughout all of our faith, is that it's not very simplistic. We take circumstances, we take other factors into account, and we say, no, you have to think about these, you have to pray about these, and you have to have discussions about these to help you make the teaching within the right framework of Catholic teaching. So it's not you're not a robot that just chooses one way or the other. You have to go through that type of that process. It's necessary. So I think that's very important that we remind people of that. Did you want to, Jennifer, as we wrap up, we talked about conscience. Is there any other resources out there? I mean, the one thing I found, and again, talking about when you're in that situation, if you haven't had those conversations, and again, I'll go back to the day my mother passed away. We took her from the nursing home back to the hospital. It was clear that a death was imminent, but again, going back to talking with the medical staff, they don't like to give you, they kind of give you generalities. Like, it could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be a week from now, we don't know. And here we are processing it. I'm in the hospital room with my mom, who she's on oxygen and had lost consciousness, and you're moving forward, you're trying to make all these decisions, trying to keep everybody informed of what's going on. And then the doctors come in, and then the social workers come in, and everybody's asking you questions, because at that point, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, having that healthcare proxy, having that conversation. Now, at that point, in that moment, you're being asked all these questions. Where do we move to? And I've shared this with you in our conversations leading up to this webinar. As much as I've studied this issue and end of life, the care and the Catholic teaching on it, it's quite different when you're in that exact moment, especially for a loved one. And you do start second guessing yourself. You start going, do I really understand what the church teaches here? I mean, again, I have a master's degree in moral theology, and I was questioning whether or not I understood what I actually had learned in class or what I had studied. So, and I felt lost. I genuinely felt lost. And I don't want anybody else to experience that. Is there something, is there, like, what would you recommend to somebody if they find themselves in that situation? Like, I would say, absolutely just say, you have a right to say, give me time. You're not asking for a week, you're not asking for a month, but say, everybody just needs to back off for a second. Unless it's something that is critical, needs to be made in that moment, you have a right to say, give me a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me take a breath. But beyond that, is there anything, like, is there someone people can call? Is there a hotline?
Yes, there's a wonderful resource. It's the National Catholic Bioethics Center. It's based in Philadelphia. They have free consultation. These guys and women ethicists, they're fully in line with the Catholic Church. They take phone calls and they take emails. If it's an urgent matter, there's a helpline, and it's 215-877-2660. And they recommend that it only call that number if it's urgent, and they will answer your questions. They will talk to the hospital staff to get more details, because oftentimes when we present a problem or a situation as lay people, we don't have all the specifics, but they can actually intervene on your behalf and speak with the medical staff to get all the facts, and then advise you as far as the Catholic teaching and the best decision to make to be in line with Catholic teaching. So often we get calls, and I always direct people to this helpline. If it's not urgent, they ask that you email them, and they promise to get back to you within 24 to 48 hours with a response. Again, they may need more details, more information, but I have given this number out numerous times at presentations, and I have gotten very positive feedback. This is a real good resource. It's free, it's confidential, and it really is a good thing to have in your back pocket, this number, because you never know when you're going to need it.
Thank you,
There's
Jennifer.
also,
Yeah, and we'll share that. We're going to share that slide so
okay,
people can write down that number. And this is a good plug for this as well. The slides that you've seen throughout this presentation will be available on the NJCC website. Jennifer has graciously agreed to allow us to share them with everyone, and so you can go back and review this information. And there may be some information that we didn't specifically address in this in our discussion today, but it's there for you, for the viewer to see, to review, to get more information on. I just have two follow-up questions regarding the National Catholic Bioethics Center number. When you say if it's an urgent matter, is that and again, if you don't know, that's fine. Is that a 24/7? If you find yourself in this situation at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you say, "Can I have some time?" Can you call that? And do you know? I mean,
I
if you
think
don't, that's fine. I just was wondering.
I think it's considered a helpline, which means that they will get you an ethicist call back very quickly.
Okay.
A hotline would be someone's always answering the phone that can answer your questions. I think it's a helpline, but someone will get back to you if it's an urgent matter. They'll get back to you very quickly.
Okay. That's good to know. So, I think that was the only follow-up I had. And again, they can help you fill out your advance directive. Like, you can call them and email them. So again, it just reiterates the point that preparation
Yeah.
is key in
Yes.
this. Yeah. Okay. All right. Jennifer, unless there's something that we've missed that you want to talk about in terms of leading up to this, I do want to talk for a second, because I think it's a very powerful part of this. Talk from the component of the loved one with the family member who is ill, and the important role they play is not just being the healthcare advocate or being the ride or the person that shoulders the burden, but there is a moment of grace-filled opportunity there. And I didn't know if you wanted to share the Catholic perspective of that. We've kind of shared what you're going through to prepare yourself to go through these end-of-life situations, but I think it's also proper to prepare yourself as someone who may have to journey with someone through that. Is there anything you would like to share on that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the principle of interdependence. We're meant to live in community, and so often today we're little islands unto ourselves. Again, Saint Pope John Paul II talked about compassion, and compassion means to journey with your loved one that's suffering or at the end of life's stage. Again, the end of life can be sacred, a sacred time, and a time of growth and preparation for the eternal life. So it's so important to have presence with your loved one who's at this stage. So often we're so busy doing and taking care of things that we forget just to sit with the person, pray with the person, talk to the person, share memories. All of that can improve a person's quality of life at this stage. When there's doubt about what's next, there's confusion, there's fear around dying. If you are present with someone, that's probably the best gift you can give them during this time. There's a wonderful book that a friend of mine gave me when my mom was, dying of cancer. It's called Midwife for the Soul, and it compares the process of dying to the process of giving birth. It's like a journey into life and a journey out of life. And it truly is a process. And this woman that wrote the book is a Catholic hospice nurse, and she talks about the spirituality of dying, how to sit with someone, how to pray with someone, and what to look for during that final stage, as far as physically and mentally and emotionally. And it really was a gift to me. I've actually bought this book in bulk, and I hand them out to people that I know are in this situation, because it was such a gift for me to really reflect on the real importance of being present to that person that's facing life's end. And it can be a real gift to look through.
It's just one final sharing of, from my own experience. You're absolutely right. I know for a couple of years prior to my parents becoming ill, one of the things I struggled with as an only child was the thought of losing my parents, and had a lot of conversations with God on that in my prayer life about how that would affect me, and not looking forward to that. And the opportunity I had over the last few months, to be with my parents, while it was difficult and extremely sad, I never felt closer to my Catholic faith than I did going through those moments. I mean, again, that's why I call them opportunities of grace. So, I think what you just said is absolutely important, that ministry of presence. For at least 4 months, I was going every day, twice a day, sometimes more than twice a day if it was the weekend, but to see my mom, just to make sure she had the care and that's an important thing. I do want to bring that up to people. When if you do have a loved one going through that and they're in a facility, being there, being present for them, you want to believe the care is the same, but it does help facilitate care for them if the staff sees that you're active. The person has somebody advocating for them on their behalf. But anyway, I was going multiple times a day to see my mom and see my dad, and then after they passed, it's funny now I think about it, like I actually miss, as hard as it was in the moment to say, okay, I got to go do this now, I'm so tired, but I got to go visit mom, I got to do my second visit for her. I miss those opportunities because they were grace-filled, even with my mom and her cognitive state being impaired at times, and some of the things she was saying she was seeing that weren't clearly there. Always be able to bring her back to say a rosary with us, or have some type of prayer discussion. It was just such a great moment, and I definitely believe it impacted my faith life for the better moving forward. So I think that's a great way to end it, is to talk about that, because
Yeah, I
we
can
might miss
totally
those.
relate. I can totally relate to that. One of the things growing up, my parents were never very physical people, not a lot of affection, and they showed their love in different ways. But as both my parents were journeying towards the end, I was able to brush my mom's hair and to put lotion on her arms and do physical things that we had never done before. My dad, he was in an assisted living facility because of his Parkinson's. He couldn't even feed himself. So for the last few months, I would go at lunchtime and at least feed him lunch. And just that physical connection just really made so much of a difference for me in facing the loss of both of them. And you say great moments of grace and time of grace. I always say these are opportunities to grow in holiness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's self-sacrifice, but it also brings you closer to our Lord, who and to our Blessed Mother, who would want us to take care of the sick. So
yeah, and it is, especially when it's a parent. For me, it also felt like a way of repaying them for all the sacrifices they made for me. Not that they ever looked for any type of repayment, but that brought some peace to my soul, that I was able to offer them that type of care, and because I did the same thing, the feeding and
yeah. I think I always look at it like
lotion.
when things are done, you don't want to have any regrets.
Right,
So that was always my mantra. Don't have any regrets. Don't have any regrets. And I
right.
can honestly say I don't. So that's gives me a sense of peace.
So Jennifer, I think I'm getting the sign from John, who's our producer today. He's off camera. We want to thank John Hardiman, our communications director here at the conference. He's the one who's going to be editing this and trying to, I know it's not going to be a problem. You're always a home run, Jennifer, when you come on to our video series, but he's going to have a job. There might be a different person sitting in, he might have to dub somebody else sitting in for me. This was my first time hosting one of these videos, but we're getting the sign that it's time to wrap up. Again, we could talk about this for multiple hours, multiple videos, and maybe it's something we can explore, because I was thinking there's so much here that we could possibly build off of.
Yeah.
But we'd love to have you back on, Jennifer, for a future video or future discussion on this, because I think it's such an important topic. But thank you, as always.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing your gifts with us. You're phenomenal. You know,
Oh,
you're one of the
thank
best.
you.
Yeah, one of my heroes to work with there, Jennifer. I always appreciate the time we spend together.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right. God bless. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is our first video for Respect Life Month on end of Catholics and end of life healthcare issues. We will have future videos coming out. We ask you to stay tuned, and please feel free to download the resources that we have here. Look at the books that Jennifer recommended, and thank you, and God bless you.